welcome back to another episode of Raise 'em Up, podcast all about raising up young people in the faith and those that walk alongside of it. It's great to have everybody here where we started the season. We've got Melanie across the table from me, Jan, and Tracy is here too. So it is great to be able to continue in this conversation with this book, Three Big Questions. And last time, I do appreciate how the book has kind of laid it out of like, okay, we get the three big questions, identity, purpose, and belonging. But I love how it makes us wrestle with the question first and then get into the answer because of how tempting it can be for us to just jump to the answer. What's the answer? So last time we were on the question of belonging, and this time is Jesus' better answer, which is?
With. We belong with the people of God.
Yeah. So when it comes to where do I belong, the hope is, because that's what I kind of have to say after reading this chapter. The hope is that our young people belong with the people of God. All right. Do you pick up what I'm putting down there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What am I saying?
That it's hard to feel belonging in the church sometimes. And I think that especially for teenagers, we notice that there's disconnect and there's distance. And this tends to be the time when they move away from the church and often don't come back until they're adults. And so, yes, we long for belonging with the people of God in church, but this is also the season where we often see it not go that way.
Yeah. And because there's so many challenges to belonging. Well, and I would say always, but like here in our context right here, we're at least in the LCMS, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, we're a bigger than normal church. Mm-hmm. I think that's a way we can say it. And so, but in any congregation that there's going to be this feeling of, or this possibility of feeling left out or not included or not belonging in a church or belonging with God's people. Jan, you were going to say something?
Yeah, no, I just think that, kids at middle school, the beginning of high school, throughout high school are trying to figure out who they belong with, right? And we have to make sure as ministry leaders, as parents, that we're providing those opportunities for them to feel welcomed, encouraged, integrated into the congregations,
yes.
and not just kind of outsiders sitting there watching from the outside. Yeah. When you said that the hope is, we have to be intentional about creating space, creating opportunities for our children to feel like they do belong with the people that are here on our campus, but also with others. Yeah.
And speaking into this a little bit, I kind of want to just point out the connection, right, between identity and belonging and some of the stuff we talked about in the last episode about feeling safe. Mm-hmm. And one of those key pieces about feeling safe was one of the questions that was asked of an interviewer or interviewee at the beginning of the chapter, which is, where do you feel like yourself the most? And so one of the things that I was kind of hinting at too, and I said, I hope the church, I hope God's people can be there, is, can kids be their self in your Christian community, in your church?
Yeah. Can
they be themselves? Are they accepted? Or is it I need you to come in and I need you to fit the mold of what I need you to be every single time? Yeah. So, and I think it's a huge challenge, especially for I think I feel like we got into this last time a little bit of we come from a tradition, okay? Mm-hmm. So it's not just necessarily I would guess, but even non-denom churches have
traditions and culture and
something
norms.
They've inherited, somewhere that they've grown up and things like that. But we're Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and so you got that German heritage in our background. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of anybody new to that's really strange.
Yeah.
But then you also have, we're a church that's almost 150 years old, and you also have the culture and the traditions and the shared experiences, which are good for creating belonging. But then it's also how do you welcome someone with a different background, a different culture, and
without the shared history and all those things.
Exactly. Yeah. And I appreciate where this chapter went then. And this is dipping all around the chapter a little bit here, but especially when it came to that conversation about hospitality and the deeper connection of belonging that we all have to God, and the deeper connection of belonging that God calls his people to. Because especially in the Old Testament, that idea of hospitality it was very evident that God often spoke of strangers and foreigners
Mhm.
and welcoming them in when they are in your land. Like, so God kind of says, if you're my people, I expect you to be the
Hospitable.
place
Yeah.
where everybody belongs. And it's kind of fun. So any youth leaders out there listening, I did it. I loved it. It was one of my few moments of brilliance in ministry. It had to be 2 or 3 years ago. It was pre-pandemic, fall of 2019. And I did a series called Stranger Things.
Mhm.
And
I
it was
remember
all
that.
about
Yeah.
hospitality. It was all about how do you treat a
Stranger
How do you
things.
bring in
Ah.
someone that's different into your
Mhm.
Yeah.
community? It was so much fun. I even
Yeah.
found a way to like recreate the Stranger Things like theme intro as a bumper for each talk. It was so much
Nice.
fun because every night the new title came up for what the talk was. Yeah, a few moments of
Love it.
brilliance in ministry. But that's the idea: is the church or will the church? It's not can.
Yeah.
We're capable. Will the church be the place that every student feels like they belong? Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, especially all of us adults, the people listening to this podcast are representatives to our young people of who God is and the
Mhm.
love that He has for us, and whether or not they feel welcomed with God.
Yeah.
You know?
And not just welcomed, I think, to something that with my kids being 19 and 22 is just being authentic at
Yes.
church. Like
Yeah.
if they come and they feel like they belong and they feel welcomed,
Mhm.
but they simultaneously feel like they cannot be authentically who they are,
Mhm.
that's not going to last. And I think we see that in that younger generation of what the duration of their connectedness is at church.
Absolutely.
Because if they cannot be here in their church and feel authentic and connected,
Mhm.
then they will find they will eventually start making choices about that's really not. I'm not feeling like that's me. You
Mhm.
know.
Mhm.
And let's dig deeper because I
Yeah.
think a lot of times when we have this conversation, we can stay at that surface level of I can't be authentic.
Mhm.
Let's unpack what that means. I'll give you an example. I had a leader, it's a kid that was in one of your kids' classes, leader of youth group, who was easily the one that everybody looked to,
Mhm.
who went up to Texas A&M, got involved in like the Impact Retreat, and
Mhm.
came back. And again, leader,
Yeah.
leading discussions, leading ministry, leading conversations, bringing everybody in, all of this stuff. And as we're sitting there in the summer, the year before they're going off to college, I kind of say, "Hey, how was that? How was that time at Impact?" And they said it was great. I could finally be myself.
You were
Ah.
like, wait, what?
Yeah.
I know. I was sitting there, and
Yeah.
again, it was like end of year 2
Right.
maybe for
Yeah.
me. So it's kind of like, what did we do wrong?
Yeah.
And so, but thankfully, even before I knew the whole "be curious, not judgmental"
Right.
comment, I did ask a question. I was
Yeah.
again like,
Tell me what that
thankfully,
looks like.
like, yeah, tell me more. That's what
Yeah.
it was. It was
Yeah.
tell me more. Maybe I'd been introduced to like Love and Logic at that
Yeah.
point, and that's what helped me to say, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
And it was particularly for this student, the way that they worshiped was the big
Oh.
thing. So they felt that they could close their eyes and throw their hands in the air and worship and not be judged or laughed at
Yeah.
and just embrace the moment,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Which again, I grew up in a very traditional setting,
Yeah.
very much here. So the raising the hands isn't a normal feeling for me. It's not something
Sure.
that I'm super drawn to. And so, but at the same time, I'm not
Not
go,
opposed to it.
Do
Yeah.
your thing.
Yeah.
Right? Do
Yeah.
your thing, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But in a traditional
Mhm, mhm.
culture and things like that, that judgment can be communicated, or
Mhm.
that laughter, or that strange, like, why are they doing that?
Yeah.
Or what are we doing? And so it was a really interesting, they felt like they couldn't be their authentic self.
In
And they said they
worship,
could
yeah.
finally close their eyes and not care at all what everybody else thought. It was
Wow.
so beautiful to hear that though.
Yeah.
So what are some other examples you've heard in students of, I can't be myself, I can't be authentic?
Well, I think a lot of us, and I think this goes for adults as well, is it's the vulnerability of I need help or I messed up.
Yeah.
So either one of those that put us in a position of need can feel very scary, and we don't often see that modeled as
Mhm.
much as it could be from an adult perspective, from the pulpit, things like that. So when I think about, if I genuinely am going through a hard time in my life, our culture has said, suck it up, deal with it, keep busy, put your head down, you'll get through it. And we've kind of frowned upon asking for help, just as
The struggle.
the independence has won out over our design for community that God has
Yeah.
placed us to bear each other's burdens. And I think that bleeds into our church naturally as it comes from the outside culture. So I think asking for help and, when you need help, being served is sometimes uncomfortable. And so, you don't feel authentic when you have a need and you can't really talk about it because you feel like you shouldn't have a need.
Absolutely. My grow group struggles with that. We're all some 20s,
servants,
30s,
yeah.
starting 40s group. And man alive, do we talk about how much it is so hard to be served.
Yep.
Huge servant hearts.
Yeah.
Every
Yeah.
single
Yeah.
one,
Yeah.
ready to help, ready to go, ready to do.
Yeah.
But the second someone says to you, "Can I take your plate?" No.
I got it.
Simple
I can take my
things.
plate.
Simple
I got
things.
it.
Yeah.
You love taking someone else's plate, but you feel very vulnerable if someone were to help you. And so, and it's really interesting. Like I think back to when I first got here and we were very deep into worship, grow, serve, and go. And one of the ways we talked about serve
Mm-hmm.
was that meant to serve and
Be
served.
Yeah.
And it was that language that was so interesting of we had to it's almost like you needed to switch it for our congregation because we're all so tempted to let's serve. But the minute you ask me to be served, it is so uncomfortable for me.
Well, and
Yeah.
it's kind of the picture of the upper room, which is brought up a lot
Yes.
in this chapter of when Jesus goes to wash his disciples' feet. They're like, please don't. Like, I'll do it myself. That
Peter's
you
like,
shouldn't do it.
absolutely
Yeah,
not. Yeah.
please don't do this.
Yeah.
And and we're tempted to do the same thing where we kind of push it away and no, I'll be fine without it. And there's a quote later in the chapter that was essentially, we're not a group of loosely connected, independent religious people. We're supposed to be an interdependent community that serves and is served, right? So, but I think a lot of us do treat the church experience as I come, I get what I need, I leave, or I come, I serve, and I leave, without truly experiencing community as Jesus would have us experience it. And I like that it's about, you don't have to earn a seat at the table was one of the phrases that stuck out to me. And another was that Jesus has more in mind for our community as a church than we often allow to occur within the walls of our church community.
It goes back to that vulnerability,
Mhm.
right? So that's one of those, I can't be vulnerable and authentic
Right.
Yeah.
because of the community and that surface level community we
Yeah.
have.
I think one of the tricky things too for young adults, older teens, young adults, is to try to figure out how do we be deeply connected with people that we don't
Mhm.
always agree with.
Mhm.
Like that we have kind of profound differences with.
Yeah.
And I know politics is always the dirty word to get going in a conversation. But for a young person to be able to say to themselves, I politically view things differently than the people that I'm sitting with, but I can still be authentic in that and respected, and we can all get together. And I think that's really the damage that we do as a society when we discount that we can be connected with people who we disagree with.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. That's something, and I do feel like both as a parent and as an educator that these next generations just won't stand for it. So we have to figure it out. All of us old people who don't like to hang out with people we disagree with, we have to figure that out.
Yeah,
Amen.
and I've seen it play out in the younger generations too. So I'm more fearful, right?
Yeah.
Because there's the polarization is seen very young
Mm-hmm.
and very old. I'm really proud of millennials. I think we're in the middle.
The
We've seen
ambivalence.
it.
Yeah.
And it's like, because I think we grew up in a time where I might have been naive actually in the 90s and the early 2000s, but it at least seemed that whatever the election result was, they were still president. That kind of a
Right.
thing. There was still a level of respect for whoever it was. Turning the corner into 2008, my generation watched and saw complete disrespect for whoever was in the White House. It didn't matter from there forward.
Mm-hmm.
There was this group that was always just going to talk about how awful they were.
Yeah.
So, and granted, it was the 2004, 2008 actually even of just the debates were like miserable to watch because
Yeah.
there's this great disrespect that just always happened
Yeah.
in
Right.
one of the ways or something like that. And it's even interesting watching how this past fall election had kind of come out and just seeing the night of things. And it kind of said like polarization is the new tactic
It's the new,
as
yeah.
much as we can. Well, it goes back to, you've seen The Social Dilemma on
Yeah.
Netflix.
Yeah.
Love
Yeah.
it because it just calls out what technology is doing to us. and it's just trying to make us pull further and further apart. But I get what you're saying. I think what we need is I don't know if it's millennials leading or whoever feels this way lead it, right? To find our way back to
Respect.
something in the center that allows us to respect people for having different views. Because especially as the Christian church, we have to recognize the world does not agree with us.
And I think we as a church and we in our own homes need to open up and kind of maybe look inside and see what we're showing our children
Absolutely.
is right. Because, we are where they're going to see their first modeling of hearing different ideas, hearing different things.
Absolutely.
And I think about like at my house, my husband and I are, one of us is more extreme than the other one. And if he's listening, he totally knows that it's him. And I tend to be more middle of the road. And I love to hear both sides and stuff. But we have these conversations in front of our children, right? So that they can see, I may not agree with everything he's saying, but we're going to talk about it. And we're not going to, so that they can. Because I do watch my daughters who are, in high school. And it's interesting because they're kind of extremes on one end or the other of their kind of beliefs and political kind of leanings. And it's interesting to watch them because neither one of them wants to hear the other side. And I'm like, why?
And that's what I mean by the younger generation is polarizing. Yeah.
I mean, I'm like, I listen to everybody. And, I'm like, I'm trying to model. But it's interesting trying to navigate their conversations and for us to try to go, okay, guys, it's okay for you to believe differently. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about why.
And I was going to say, I think that polarization happens in high school. We don't see it in middle school so much. We see every now and then. Well,
I was going to say, I did in elementary school. I would hear.
I remember very vividly the election of 2020 or 2020.
No, right. I think in those big election times sure,
yes.
But just in general about being tolerant of other people not agreeing with you. Like you can't go through middle school and not think that everybody's going to agree with you. I mean, they understand, even in their friend groups, you'll hear them say things like, we don't agree on that, but they can still be in a tight group,
Interesting. Okay.
But in high school, you start seeing them dividing up to where their group is their like-mindedness, right? Like they hang out with people like themselves. You see even sometimes the stereotypical I don't even know if I should say this, but like haircuts, right? Like the kids with certain haircuts hang out with each other, and then that becomes like their vibe, right? Like we vibe because we look like each other. Everybody knows that we agree with each other.
Circles back to the last chapter,
identity,
what we share together,
what we share,
right?
yeah.
So that makes sense. So I belong with people who are similar to me as an answer.
And I think one key it's not even connected in this chapter to what we're talking about. It's not connected to politics whatsoever, but it's about how do you have group dynamics and allow people to feel that sense of belonging when you disagree. And one of the tactics that they said that, you might want to consider with your youth group or like at your family table is assuming the best. And I think when it comes to politics, especially, in your heart of hearts, you have to know that even if you avidly disagree with the other person that you're talking to, what do they desire politically? They want the best for American citizens, and they're convinced that their strategies and their ideology is the best. They're not out to destroy, even though that's the rhetoric that we hear. Like the polarization is coming from they have evil intentions and they have evil motives. You talk to anybody on the street, and their desire is to make a better place for the citizens of this country, right? And we sometimes just mow over that, and we just focus in on and letting fear rule our conversations. So if we want to model what respect looks like, that means assuming the best in people and attempting to understand like, okay, we disagree on the strategy to get to the end goal of safety for American people. Let's frame it that way. Let's not frame it as they want to get rid of this or they want to implement that or they want to steal this. They want to do that. Right. Let's not demonize. Let's.
And I know for me personally, like I believe it was the second debate of Obama-Romney. Like that was for me a very big turning point because I realized in the debate they were both talking about the same result.
Yes.
They were talking about two very different ways to get there.
It's strategies,
right?
not
one coming from
ideals.
a senator perspective of federal government, one coming from a governor in a state's situation, both wanting the same result. But circling us back and kind of grounding us back. I want to go back to something that I said earlier, and I won't get it exactly right, but there was something along the lines of, as Christians, I think we need to be uh, honest
Mm-hmm.
about the fact that we are somewhat minorities in the world almost, right? There's
Yeah.
going to be people that disagree with us. And as I said that, I realized the temptation might be for people to, because we've been talking about politics, think that I'm talking about politics. I am not.
No. Yeah.
I'm talking about the fact that God took on flesh in the person of Jesus Christ, died and rose again so that we can have eternal life, right? That is a controversial
Statement.
belief and
Yeah.
stance and conviction that we share together. Now, add to that, right? Like, because I want to go back to what we share.
Mhm.
What is that authentic thing, that perspective that we can bring into every conversation? And I think this crosses denominational boundaries. This is a Christian thing. It's not
Mhm.
an other religion thing. Christian believe that we were created by God. Every person was
Every
created by
person.
God, designed by Him, and out of love, right?
Yeah.
And that design was broken, right? And again, this is no secret to all of us sitting around here with our lives in the church and things like that. That design was broken. And so as humans, we fall short every single day. We're not perfect. We're not going to say the right things. We're not going to do all the right things because there's the spiritual DNA that's a part of us because of our first parents, Adam and Eve. Okay? And God saw that and said, hey, right at the beginning, I'm going to do something to change that. I'm going to send someone that's going to make life different. And that's what we see in the person of Jesus Christ.
Yep.
So God took on that flesh to show us the new way, to win for us the new way. And I love what we see then in the scriptures, especially with Jesus and the diversity of people that He's brought into, the diversity of the world at that time, all those pieces that show there's different viewpoints that come into the church all of the time. And so for us to be able to learn, yes, we're very different, but we have such a commonality in the community through the love of God that He shows to us. And we need to be able to let Him lead that.
Yep.
Yeah, my favorite. So when we were talking about hospitality, talking about the upper room, right? My favorite thing that people say is Judas ate too.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
That hospitality was not only given to the people that were doing exactly the right thing, that were saying exactly the right thing. Jesus knew exactly what Judas had already done and was going to do, and he still sat there and ate at the table.
And he washed his
with
feet,
Jesus. He cleaned his feet, knowing that they absolutely had different views on money and the
Yep.
importance of, money and those kinds of things. But he was right there at that table with him. And that's our example of, you know what, people, we're not going to have the same opinions or thoughts on some things.
Yeah.
But you know what? Judas was still a follower of Jesus.
Mhm.
He
Yep.
followed Jesus. He learned from Jesus.
Yeah, and I won't go so far as to
know,
say like
yeah.
be like Judas. No. Yeah,
but
like
Judas ate
but-
too. We
and-
need to invite people to our table.
right. And so that again, getting the attention back where it needs to be
Yeah.
on Jesus.
Jesus.
Right.
Yeah.
What did Jesus do? What
Yeah.
kind of community did
Yeah.
He create? Because that's really what this chapter is getting at. And for our young people, I think they are starving for the kind of community that they know Jesus leads. The question is, are we looking at Jesus or not?
Right.
The first quote that really got really deep into this that stood out to me, it was on page 169. As they're talking about John 17, the high priestly prayer, where Jesus is praying for unity. And it said, I was going to say Scott, Kara and Brad, right? Through the church, we choose to move toward one another in Jesus' name.
Mm-hmm.
This unity creates a sign to the world through the ways we live and treat one another as brothers and sisters, strengthening one another rather than tearing one another apart. As Brad's friend Warren is fond of saying to our church, this means we are much more than just a loose association of the independently spiritual, what Melanie quoted earlier. We are one body. We depend on one another and experience God through one another. That's what it means to be God's people. I just thought that was that orientation towards each other
Right.
because of our orientation towards Jesus.
Yeah.
Because of our yes to Jesus, we have a yes to people
Mm-hmm.
that then we see them for who they are. They're people just like us who have different backgrounds and experiences and reasons why they think the way that they do, but who are also created by God, designed by God, loved by God, and broken, right? And who are not perfect and who are going to make mistakes and things like that. So that's that redeeming perspective, I guess, when it comes to seeing even our young people.
Like that's a great vision for every church, right?
Exactly.
But how does it play? Like, how do we implement it? How does that play out to where people walk in and they feel that vision that we are one body? That's the trick, I think.
And it starts by remaining in Jesus, and it on the individual level and on the community level. That that interconnectedness comes from a command of Jesus to remain, to stay connected, to abide in me. And that's, they say that on 169 as well, that it's the church, Jesus hopes that the church will be something more, but it starts with the desire that we remain fully and completely connected to him. And it's through that we're empowered to move toward one another in Jesus' love. And I love the way that Scripture shows us the same kinds of things that we experience now. The community of Jesus was messy, not just Judas, Peter.
They were
Absolutely.
all broken.
Yeah, they were
How
all
many- Thomas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
many times were there arguments and where
Yeah.
Jesus had
Honestly,
to
James and
correct?
John.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but he continually served them, taught them, challenged them, encouraged them, right? So
Philip,
there's this
Andrew,
I was gonna
constant
say-
Matthew.
Yep.
They were all-
Identity, their own. Who am I?
Yeah.
Where do I belong? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing?
And he never once pushed anybody away,
yeah.
but he did not shy away from calling people out for their sins and then inviting them back into repentance and loving them and serving them. And I mean, think of all the people that he fed that would
gonna say,
eventually
even the
walk
outer
away from
circle.
him,
Yeah.
know? Think about the Pharisees, some of whom were converted and believed, many of whom went on to plot his death.
Mhm.
But his ministry and his love toward all the people, his desire to bring them in, to draw them in, to speak hard truths and encouraging truths to them, all stemmed from his deep love. So if we are coming, I keep going back to this, like it's become my mantra for life. If you're coming from a place of fear of the outside world, then you need to hit the reset button, because Jesus didn't fear the world. He deeply loved the world. And that's where we need to be. So I know I'm very conscious of my fear and the way that it gets in the way of me offering belonging to people, or, like my fear getting in the way of loving people well. And I think that that's one of the answers that we individually and we as the church need to explore is,
Yes.
are we providing belonging authentically the way Jesus would, or are we working from a place of fear that is actually isolating us from people that need us?
Well, and
Yeah.
it goes back to orientation, right? So
Yeah.
like when we talk about, and maybe by the time this is released, we have the phrase in our brains of letting Jesus lead, right?
Mhm.
So the idea of what is your compass pointing towards? Is it pointing towards Jesus, or is it pointing towards yourself?
Yep.
I mean, like you go back to that Latin phrase, incurvatus se, the heart curved in on itself. And that's a phrase that's used to describe basically the definition of sin. Sin is selfishness. I mean, I would say every sin that we commit is done out of selfishness. It is for self-preservation or self-gain
Gratification,
or
yeah.
Comfort,
exactly.
or yep.
So when we're oriented toward ourself, like the rest of the world,
Mm-hmm.
that's no bueno.
It's
right?
isolating.
It's isolating, and
By
it's
its very
turning
nature.
you away from God, turning you away from others.
Yep.
Versus when we're oriented towards Jesus, as we said at our junior high mission trip last summer, when Jesus is your sensei, right? When you listen to what he has to say, when he's the leader, when he guides your life, that's when this community is possible. And the more that we can together look at Jesus, the more that we can together be led by Jesus and learn and grow in what that means, the more people are going to find that kind of community in our midst, and the more our kids are going to see what that looks like too.
Yeah.
And so I just really appreciate that thing. And the other, one big reason why I appreciated this chapter too was the questions, because I love questions, because questions breed conversation, questions bring thought, questions are curious, and well, sometimes questions can be judgmental, I guess. But like, I love, like, there was kind of 3 sets of questions in here. We'll just give folks a taste of these. Starting 171, about questions about exploring belonging with your student, with your kid. I'm sorry. I'm so used to saying student because I don't have a kid. All right. But they do the now, God, how, right? Which is one of the frameworks we've seen throughout the books. But just an example, like a now, when do you feel the most comfortable around other people? Right? That's when you're going to discover where your kid feels like they belong the most. And we would love for that to be church, but we'll get to that. God, how do you know you belong with God's people? And maybe that's going to get an answer like, I don't know if I fit with God's
Yeah.
people.
I like the next question.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. What does our church or ministry do to help you feel like you belong unconditionally? And then what do you wish
I love that
our
second
church or
question.
ministry would do differently? Because I think talking to our kids, what is it that you want? And
Right.
knowing that, okay, yeah, maybe it's having my energy drinks in the refrigerator for my student volunteers, which does help my student volunteers come
Mhm,
volunteer for me because
mhm.
they know they're going to have energy drinks. Sorry, parents, in the refrigerator waiting for them. But what is it that we can do to help you feel like you belong and giving them that ownership and that feeling of this is their ministry. too.
Exactly.
And it goes
Yeah.
back to being seen and heard, which
Yes.
we talked about earlier in the book too, is that just ultimately, the youth want to be seen and heard. So when we ask them questions like, how would this look for you? Or what could we do to create this for you? It gives them that sense of being seen and heard.
And then
And
allowing them
ownership
to
too,
help
yeah.
us to develop that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and it
great.
goes back to us saying from Fuller Youth Institute, Scott Cormode says leadership begins with listening. And as we've talked about, I've kind of said love begins with listening.
Yeah.
So as we love our kids and our students, I mean, and that's the thing is, yes, like church workers need to be asking these questions, but parents, you can ask your
Yes.
kid these
Mhm.
questions.
Because you can be under the assumption that, oh, yeah, it's totally a safe place. Everybody knows they're welcome. But unless you ask and really get a finger
Yeah.
on the pulse of those kids, you might be completely wrong in your assumptions
And
because it's about felt safety,
Right.
Mhm.
not just implied safety or actual safety.
Yeah.
You might be the safest person in the world, but if they don't know it and feel it, then you're dead in the water.
Yeah, and I think Jan would probably agree, having daughters in high school as well, is it is a really important skill to be able to sit down with your students or your children and say, where do you not feel that? Because sometimes our kids feel like there's an expectation to stay in a group, right? They've kind of naturally fallen into a group, or they get invited by a group and they don't want to be rude. We raise polite children sometimes, and
Yeah.
they're like, well, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings and say I don't really want to go. So they end up doing and being a part of things that they don't
They
feel
don't actually want to do
and they
it.
don't really feel belonging
Yeah.
there, and they don't feel safe there. And we have to make sure that we're always giving them the both sides of that question. Where do you feel that belonging? And then also learn to identify where you don't and why. Is it because there's something happening that is making you feel unsafe or making you feel uncomfortable? Or is it because you lack connection there and you want to build connection there? Either way, whatever the answer you get is going to lead to a positive outcome for them. So don't always just ask, where do you feel belonging and connection, but where are you lacking that too?
And as far as it concerns like the life of the church, I would say, speaking from my past experience, do your best to have these conversations and then immediately act upon them.
Yes, please.
Yes.
I will tell you, as the student ministry guy for 6 years, I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
And most of the
Yeah.
time, I will learn about things, and what I'll hear is, well, 4 years ago, and I'm like, that would have been
Great.
great to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
4 years ago, or even sometimes it's not that long of a gap. It's like, well, 3 months ago, and it's like, I would have loved to have known when it happened, because the closer you are to a situation, well, we'll get to that, right? Well, so the how question on this one, right? I love, can we think of some ideas together for how I can remind you that you belong with God's people, right? So that's just a good example. And then another one, I go back to that chapter where Kara joked about like carrying the book with her to talk to young
Yeah.
people.
Mm-hmm.
Buy the book, folks. Turn to
Good
chapter
one.
7. Again, this page 171 starts these, but page 172 is conversation for when a teenager doesn't want to go to church.
That never happens.
Yeah, and remember, conversations, not commands. Right?
Yes.
Conversations about why you don't want to go to church. No, you're not saying that they're off the hook, but you're opening the door to say, okay, what can we do to help this be a better situation for you?
Or to learn why.
Yeah,
right?
why?
The why. And again, there's just this assumption that goes into it. Oh, great. Here goes my teenager doing what the rest of the world is doing. They're just leaving church. They're
Yeah.
lazy. They're sleeping, blah, 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 blah. That is what we call judgment.
Yeah.
Okay? Be curious, not
Yeah.
judgmental. And this page 172 has 11 questions on there that you can ask your your kid when they don't want to go to church. They can open up a conversation.
I love the question number 6 on page 172. It says, I wonder how God could work through your frustrations with church to bring something new.
Yeah.
We're giving purpose and validation to a negative feeling in order to bring about something positive that benefits not only your kid, but also the church as a whole. So are you feeling unwelcome because of something that was misconstrued from the pulpit? Are you feeling disengaged because you would really rather not hear that same hymn every single week? You'd rather get some different music, whatever it might be.
Sure.
But I wonder how God could work through this frustration, not to get you out of the church, not to isolate you, but so that you can be part of a solution that benefits the church. That's community.
Yeah.
We should be asking ourselves those questions when we feel like we don't belong in church.
Right.
How could God be using this frustration to propel me into the church, not to give me an out from this community?
Exactly.
And I think we live in a culture and society that it's so easy to walk away from things.
Oh,
Yep.
for
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
We
sure.
see it with
Yes.
marriages.
Yes.
Didn't like it,
with-
I'm out. Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Yep.
people don't make that commitment to
perseverance.
stay and to work through.
That's a
And I
benefit
think-
of church community
Right,
is
and
we're
I
all
think-
committed to making it the best community for each other.
Yeah, and I
Right.
think as a church, for sure,
Mhm.
we have to make sure that people know it's okay to express an opinion and to share your thoughts with us and for our kids too. I'm thinking, kids, come to me and tell me, hey, I don't like,
The amount of
this
gossip
thing
that happens
right,
between, or
it
whatever. Yeah.
is.
And to have the humility when you do that, right?
Yep.
So
Yes.
like that's the other key is because I can tell you from the leadership roles that I've had here, there's sometimes when someone brings forth one thing,
Mm-hmm.
that is not jiving with the other 95%. Now, it's not saying it's not a valid thing.
Right.
It's just saying maybe not now, or maybe we can talk with other people. And what do we make of the
Mm-hmm.
fact that you're the sole person with this thought or this opinion? What
Yeah.
does this mean? Again, processing it in that way. So to have some humility of one of the things that you had said, Melanie, of thinking about everybody. We're
Yeah.
thinking about each other.
Well,
Yeah.
it's
How
that
can I serve each other?
outward,
Be there. Exactly.
Right?
The
That's what you
outward
were saying.
orientation.
Yeah, outward orientation. And I think too, like the teenagers in particular, sometimes have a false preconceived notion about something that hasn't really been said from the pulpit
Mhm.
or something that hasn't been done at church, but they think it is going to, or they have this idea that they think they know where
Yeah.
the church would stand
Oh,
or
sure.
where
Well,
you
like
know-
conversations, all the controversial conversations that people from 8 years old to 99 want to have
yes,
about sexuality, about gender, about all these things.
who's not welcomed or this or
right,
that.
or who's going to hell
Yes,
and all this
and I
other
don't
stuff.
think
Yeah.
that they've really ever.
Never fully asked.
No, they
never fully
haven't
talked to anybody
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
And maybe that's a two-way street. Maybe they haven't asked, but maybe the church could do a better job in general at
Mhm.
coming to that young community with, hey, just so you know, this is how we feel. Everybody's welcome at the table. We
Mhm.
want the doors open, you
Yeah.
know?
And it's
Yeah.
having that environment of, I want to hear what you have to say, and I'm
Right.
not going to judge you immediately when
Yeah.
you say it.
Right.
My love
right.
for you isn't going to change
Yes.
just because you
Yes.
have
Well,
different
and again,
opinions.
just to
or-
preview that conversation, because again, there's a
Yeah.
curiosity, and their TikToks and their YouTubes are telling them
Mhm.
the church is this, and the church is a bunch of bigots, and a church is a bunch of all these other things. And it's like, ask the church. And I can tell you, like, our response is, let's look to God. Let's
Yeah.
ask God.
Yeah.
Let's let Him lead the conversation. And again, the basic layout of Scripture.
Yeah.
God made everyone. Everything broke.
Yep.
Everything's fractured, which makes it really hard to navigate because we're dealing with both the fact that we were designed by God, but we're also broken.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of times where there's things we want to do or things that we're tempted to do or that we find ourselves oriented towards that aren't actually the way God designed things to be, which is why He laid down His law when He did.
Yep.
With the 10 Commandments. I tell people a lot of times it was kind of like, this is who I created you to be. Someone who loves God and loves others. And this is what loving me and honoring me looks like. And this is what loving other people looks like. And so then it's a matter of, okay, now what do we do with that? Like we're now this simultaneously saints and simultaneously sinners
Mm-hmm.
because of what Jesus accomplished for us. We're saved. We have faith.
Yeah.
But then we also fall short. And so how do we navigate all of these conversations through that lens of knowing, yeah, there are some things that dishonor God. but there's ways to honor God in the way that we talk about those things, the way we address those things.
Mhm.
So it's kind of an interesting, like, and again, it was interesting. I had a conversation this past week of I'm not one of those that would go, well, here's your chart for who's going to hell and who's not going to hell.
Yeah, no.
Right. And if
Yeah.
I did make that chart, it would be those who trust and believe in Jesus and those who do
Seriously.
not. Right?
Yeah, that's about the only chart you could make.
Yeah. But it has nothing to do with these bigger picture conversations. And again, we have to walk into all of those conversations with humility and respect. Ultimately, for humility to what God says and respect for what he says. Ultimately there. But also humility and respect with each other and having difficult conversations.
Yeah.
I love that this chapter spent a good amount of time talking about repair.
Oh,
Yes, that was the
Yes.
third set. So
Yes.
again, a reason to buy this book for chapter 7. 3 sets
Repair.
of questions you can ask. 11 questions on the one. How many were on the belonging? 9 questions on the belonging, and now we have 12 questions about repair,
Love
which
it.
goes all to this. Your kid will be broken at some point
Mhm.
because you,
Are
human
also
being,
broken.
were also broken and are also broken at some point. So here's 12 wonderful questions of the Now God How framework to ask your kid about things that need to be repaired.
Specifically relationships where there's
yes.
relational
Yeah.
brokenness. Yeah.
I love number 2. What hurts most right now? Meeting your kid right where they're at.
Yeah.
Not trying to get them through, not trying to fix it. Meet them exactly where they're at with whatever's broken. What hurts most right now? And just unpacking it. There's so many different questions in here that are so helpful.
I will say so far in this book, that is like the biggest thing is listening to my kid
listen.
without trying to fix it
Yep.
right in that moment. Just letting them
Yep.
talk and share with me and me being willing to take myself out of the equation, which is really hard because I do kind of want to make it about me and how I can fix it. It's not about me, it's about them and their situation.
Right.
Right.
And listening to what they
And
are
just-
saying.
Yeah, that does sound painful. Thank you for telling me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
Just sit with it. You know, just
yes.
sit with it. That's real empathy. That's what we,
Mhm.
another thing we need to
Yeah.
practice is just that, man, yeah, that is hard. I didn't know.
Uh-huh.
And I think too, when you said that the question of like what hurts the most right now, sometimes we try to fix something that we see that's maybe over here, and you can't really do that until you know what's really hurting them right now. Like
Yeah.
Mhm.
you have to be able to address the here and now, what they're working through immediately before we can start tackling other things that they're struggling with.
It's kind of like a symptom thing, right? We
Yeah.
have the symptoms that sometimes we're trying to deal with without actually attacking the thing
Yeah.
that's causing the symptoms.
And that happens in schools every day. I know Melanie being from high school, in middle school. What we see is 90% of the time a symptom of something else. It's
Right.
not really the problem, and that's the tackle. That's how
Yeah.
you
I
have
had
to
a-
just kind of get down in there and figure out what is it that's really
Yeah.
driving this.
Yeah.
I had a kid, because you're so tempted, right? Again, to get in line, whatever. Kid walked into class today, and he was one of the ones that was tardy, not one of the ones that was being pulled out for something else, and just made all sorts of noise. Sits in the front row, all sorts of noise, grumpy, sat down, right? And I'm thankful. I don't know where it was. Maybe it was the KSBJ Family Life Radio on Sunday nights I was recently listening to or something, but it was kind of pointing out, or maybe it's a Facebook post, something like that, where it was just a reminder that like teachers, like when your kid's late, maybe not the most helpful question to say, why are you late?
Yeah.
Especially when they're junior high or freshmen.
Yeah.
They didn't drive themselves,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And get there. So I just I kept teaching.
Yeah.
Yep.
And lo and behold, within 3
They get in
minutes,
line.
Homie was engaged in what we were doing,
Right.
writing down notes and
Yep.
things like that. Because I didn't, and it wasn't because I was avoiding, I was letting it be.
Yep.
I was
You don't
letting
have
him
to.
be him. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to make it even worse. Because imagine if I'd been like, well, can you, what's wrong? You know, why
Yeah.
are you making so much noise? Can you not be so distracted when you come in? That would have been a judgment statement. And I could have been like
Yeah.
a little curious in the situation, but I was teaching. Like we were
Yeah.
watching a video,
I
stuff
had
like
things
that.
to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like it was
It was
would have been
public,
disruptive.
right? It was
Yeah.
a lot of things
but it's
that could.
that idea of I've had that
Give a
day
little
too, brother.
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And too, kids, poor things, when they're at the mercy of their parents and siblings
and hormones. Oh.
and
Yeah.
everything else in life to
Yeah.
get to school. And then the first thing the secretary does is say, "Why are we tardy today?" And they're like,
Yes.
"I don't even know." We hear that sometimes where the kid's like,
Yeah.
"I don't know." So we have at school, we have a little sign where they can click just late. Like
Sure, yeah.
we don't really have another category. It's just we're just late.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
And the whole thing of just, to me at least, again, I'm not someone that has to worry about
Yeah.
tardies or all these things. If I was sitting there in the secretary thing, I feel like I would, depending on how my morning went, maybe. But like, I feel like most mornings I'd be like, hey, good to see you. How
Yeah.
are you?
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
All right, where are we headed to? You know, that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
just be joy. Because again, that's that.
Yeah.
I'm cool with whatever just happened. I'm
And,
welcoming you.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think as parents, we're really tempted to jump on every negative behavior to correct it because we're afraid that if we don't tackle it now, it's going to, whatever. And I think it's a good thing for us to just pause and give it a minute.
And as spouses too, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
just as humans, when it's like easy to just notice the negative. It's just,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just something that's easy to point out what didn't happen that you wanted to happen
Yeah.
versus all the millions of things that happen that make it easy to point out what didn't
Mhm.
happen,
Yeah.
you know?
Mhm.
Yeah. And circling back to these questions about repair, like I love how it says repair is a critical skill.
Yeah.
Because I do
Yes.
think we're living in a world where adults don't have the skill to repair. So
Yeah.
the more you can ask these 12 questions to your kid, like the better off they're going to be down the road when it comes to repairing relationships. And as I shared with a Sunday school class recently, repair doesn't mean you're best friends.
Right.
Right.
Repair means the brokenness has been filled in with
Mhm.
Jesus and the love that he has and what he's capable of. It doesn't mean you forget what's been done. It doesn't mean you
Hang
have
out every weekend.
yeah,
again.
exactly. It's just that all of a sudden the bad stuff that happened no longer defines that relationship. You
I
know,
love
it
that.
no longer, or especially no longer keeps breaking that relationship. It's probably an even better
Yeah.
way to say it. From there, it kind of goes into this discussion of with, where do you see with elsewhere in the Bible? Because it really focuses in that upper room. And I guess, was it on this podcast that I shared? I've always wanted to write the book.
I don't know if it
With-
was on this podcast or in
Yeah.
a different conversation that you want to write a book about.
I want to
You
write a
told me
book
that
about
before, too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been a
Yeah.
pretty common thing. I want to write a book about that, the importance of the statement with you that God says to each
Yes.
of his people. And so for us to turn the chapter again, this is my first time
Right.
reading this, going, oh great, they've already covered a lot of it. But it does it covers a good section. I mean, certainly Emmanuel, God with us or with
Mhm.
you, right? That's the name that Jesus is called when God takes on flesh. So that's important. John 1 is one of my places I go. Right? So the Word was with God in the beginning and took on flesh to be with us. Certainly, you have a whole lot of other wonderful
Yes.
things, but they missed the big ones. So my book will cover Genesis 1 and
Yeah.
2,
Yeah.
right? God is walking with
With his
Adam and
people,
Eve
yeah.
in the cool of the garden. Okay,
Yes.
come on, you can't miss that. You look
Yeah.
at Exodus. And
Tabernacle,
the
God coming to be
tabernacle,
with his
the-
people,
the
leading
fire
them.
by
Yeah.
night, the cloud by
Traveling.
day. God is
Mhm.
going with his people. And the idea of a tabernacle,
Yeah.
even the John 1, he tabernacled with
Yep.
us, right? That picture. Then the temple, God is still with his people.
And
The
then
promise,
Jesus.
the promise in the exile, that
Yeah.
he's still with
Yeah.
his people. And then, Jesus, the ultimate Emmanuel. And then flash forward to Revelation 21. They got Revelation 7. Come on. Revelation 21, in the final chapter, God says that his home is with man. I
Yeah.
will be their God and they will be my people. Joshua 1:9 echoed in Deuteronomy
Mhm.
30. Fear not. How's it go? Be strong,
strong
and
and
courageous,
courageous.
for the Lord your God will go with,
With
you,
you. Yeah.
wherever you go. Right? There's just too much to this. That ultimately, that's who our God is. He created us to be in community with him.
Mhm.
Great relationship with him. You want your head to hurt, go look at the relationship of God with himself in the Trinity, right? But then also that's what he calls us to, is this community where we're with each other, marked by hospitality and all the wonderful things that this chapter said about that too. I mean, the idea of being knit together by our shared history, task, commitment, stories, and sacrifices. That was a quote from Christine Pohl, or maybe it's Paul. We have a person that spells it this way, it's Paul. In her book, Living in Community, Cultivating Practices That Sustain Us. So this idea of we share
Yeah.
something so much more significant than ourselves. We share something together and we invite everyone into it,
Mhm.
even the stranger, even the completely brand new, never heard of Jesus, looks completely different than me, has a completely different background, has a completely different political view, has a completely different, all of the
Yep.
fill in the blanks there, is welcome in here, because I want to practice this hospitality and give them a place in my people, because God gave me a place where I didn't deserve it.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
I love that picture where they talk about this. I'm maybe saying it wrong. Medoslan Wolf, quote of about Genesis. And even in creation, God created the world and then gave us what we didn't deserve, like allowed us to be a part of it. Again, we live in America, so much freedom and so many rights. But ultimately, what we've been given, we don't deserve. And as humans, life in general, we're completely dependent on the one who gave us that.
Yeah.
So can we emulate this and do this with other people?
Yeah.
What are the things that you see in then as we look into this chapter and kind of see these ideas play out?
Two things. One is that, again, I think there's been a theme in all of the books that we've read so far, and in these chapters is you got to kind of check yourself first. Are you engaged in the church in the same way you want your kid to be engaged in the church? Are you utilizing community in the way that you hope your kid will utilize the community? Are you sharing? Are you serving and being served? Because again, we got to get right first and model, from a place of really understanding. So that self-reflection is huge. The other thing is, you mentioned we share a lot of things in common, the most important one being Jesus.
Exactly.
But I love that there's also an intentional focus on there's so much cultural diversity that is beautiful and that we get to experience in the Christian church, that it's, even if you don't have that 150-year, your seventh generation Trinity Klein member and, with a very German last name that involves a lot of phlegm when you say it, like, none of those things necessarily are the most important thing. And they point out Revelation 7 that there's a glorious vision of a massive intercultural celebration with God's people around the throne of the Lamb at the end of time. That this community celebrates the differences that we bring to the table, the differences in personalities and the way that we praise Jesus and, just the way that the way that we do life together. We had a really interesting conversation in a Young Moms Bible study about how different cultures view death. And how in Western cultures, we often are like, we either laugh about it or we ignore it or we kind of, sorry for the pun, bury it. We don't really talk about it too much. We're afraid to talk about it with our kids. Sometimes we don't want to scare them. We don't know what to say. But in a lot of South American cultures, there's this celebration of the memory of the dead people. And so kids are brought up with this normalcy in talking about death and celebrating the life of a person that's lost, and how beautiful that can be by contrast. And it was like, man, I could learn a lot from that about how to speak to my kids. Mm-hmm. And again, just these conversations that can enrich us. What can we learn in community from those that are different from us, while maintaining Christ as the focal point of our community.
And speaking of death, just because the side note is in there, right?
Yeah.
Like I love that because a lot of times too, I've said in the world of evangelism, right? The question of if you die tonight, do you think you're going to hell? Is probably not the question to ask if you're doing evangelism, because it's not going to speak to somebody that doesn't even believe in God or doesn't believe
hasn't
hell
thought
exists.
about it. Yeah.
The more important evangelistic question to me is, what do you think what do you think about your death?
Yeah.
Right? Not even what do you think happens when you
Yeah.
die, but what do you think about death? Because that is at the root of Christian belief. And I've shared with folks, death is one of God's enemies. And I think sometimes even my favorite Harry Potter series got it wrong, that death's not an old friend, right? It is an enemy of God. And it hurts. And so kind of what you're speaking to is global South, but certainly in the Eastern world.
Yeah.
And really, the whole American way, the Western way about death right now is only 100 years old, maybe.
I was going to say it's not historically how
it's-
we
In the
viewed
American,
it.
It's coming from a place of fear, of avoidance,
And control,
and fear
right?
and control.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, because
we don't want to worship ghosts and, celebrate evil and
the
whatever.
modern reason is medicine, right? So
Yeah.
we're able to live longer now
Right.
than we used to be able to live. Because you think of like Civil War. I remember a professor of mine at college talked about how America was a culture of death because death was all around you. You didn't expect to live forever. You didn't expect for your family members to live forever. It was very normal, but you also dealt with it. Like you had the whole wake situation where you had a room in your house. Your loved one was on the dining room table for however many days, right?
Yeah.
You had to deal with death and address it. And we don't do that as much, which is why I think we see, especially in the Western world, a disconnection with faith. Yeah.
Yeah.
So circling back in, right?
That was a lot to chew on there.
Yeah, it was. Sorry. This chapter does end, just to kind of bring it to a close, unless there's other thoughts here on the table too. Great feedback, page 177, about ideas to connect young people into the church and be hospitable to young people, summing them up. Notice them, know their names, be joyful to see them, as the secretary is when
Involve
there's
them.
a tardy.
Yep.
Involve them, engage with them, ask them how they want to be involved. Probably a good way to do it. Give significance to that role. That's a big push,
Yeah.
especially with the growing young research that Fuller Youth Institute did. And I loved the phrase that they had with that one. We are not all of who we are without you.
Ah, yes.
Loved it.
Yeah.
We're not all of who we are without you. That's the fullness of community that we're talking about. That's true for every age, but especially for our young people as we focus on them. And then I loved the Make Worship Meaningful chapter, and because it was about meaning. It wasn't about attraction or wonderful or all this other
Entertainment,
stuff.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was about
Yeah.
meaning. And so there's a really cool discussion there at the end of the chapter. An interesting section on 180 and 181 about the sharing of a meal as a youth group or something. So check that out. I loved the suggestions for small groups with one on page 183. Typical small group move is highs and lows. I mean, that is like a go-to because it's good for your
Or
brain
dinner table, you know.
to
yeah.
address. Yeah, great thing. But I loved the replacement questions that were possible that are more centered on belonging. And the two that they give are ask this question instead of a high and low one time. If you really knew me, you would know. Answer that question. Right? Or
Finish
fill in
that
that blank.
statement.
Finish that statement. Or if I could say anything to God, I would say, finish that statement. I'm like, I need someone to like give me 100 of those. Like, what are the other ones?
Yeah.
Because those are really, they're vulnerable. They're
Yeah.
getting to deeper things rather than just what is the best. Because I can tell you, I've been this year the crew leader for freshmen and sophomore boys. And woof, highs and lows are very surface level most of the time.
Yeah.
You know, I think a high was eating a certain food in a
Mhm,
week,
mhm,
you know, like
mhm.
that kind of a thing, which is where they're at. But I think this would,
I
we're
love
gonna
those,
practice some of these for sure. And then the biggest thing that stood out to me, and then I will be certainly content with our conversation, is this belonging paragraph on page 186 that says, true belonging starts when we end the tyranny of just fitting in, which is really a tyranny of exclusion. And so it goes back to the same
Yeah.
haircut, the same things, the same sports. Because this is when Brad's talking about the Coke shirt that he had.
Yes.
I was like, I don't
Yeah.
know what
I
you're
had
talking
one of
about.
those. I was waiting for the Coke shirt forever. I
Oh, yeah?
totally got him.
I totally was like, I was above my head, brother.
Nope,
All
I
right.
got him.
But all right, so true belonging starts when we end the tyranny of just fitting in, which is really the tyranny of exclusion. When our church becomes the kind of community that embodies the bold message of inclusion and belonging, we fulfill this yearning for young people and all generations.
I love that.
I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the tyranny of exclusion, which is the tyranny of fitting in,
Yeah.
which is at the heart of that question of belonging for especially our young people. But I've
Yes.
seen it in adults too. So I appreciate the nod to all generations
Mhm.
there at the end too.
Yeah, because when they're just trying to fit in, they don't really feel like they're with or a part.
Yeah.
of
Exactly.
Or
that.
authentic.
They
It
still-
goes
they
back
can't
to
be
Because
that.
you can't
Yeah,
be
it's all
your
ties in.
authentic self.
Because
And
you're
like we
focused
said
on
from the
putting out,
beginning.
you know, the right vibe, the right
Yep.
whatever. You're so focused on how
Yep.
you're going to be perceived that
What's my hair going to look
Yeah.
like today? And what's
Mhm.
am I wearing the Coke shirt?
Connects
or
to
the,
that.
And it goes in and out, right? If I
Yes.
belong, I'm in. But if I am trying to fit in, it's like something that could change on a dime.
Yep.
And that's a scary part too. And
Connects to the identity metaphor
Yes.
of standing on the stage in that theater and just trying to be everything for everyone.
Mhm.
I just love, this has been a great journey for me and just unpacking the meaning behind each
Yeah.
of these, but then also just at the core of all of our lives, but especially for your kids, these questions, all the questions, because we talked about this chapter. There was great ones in the identity,
Yeah.
and the enough ones too that did the now God how same thing.
Mhm.
So buy this book, engage with it,
Yeah.
have those questions ready to go in a book and things like that, because it really is just getting to the heart and learning. At the end of the day, it's about learning, which I'm a big learner, but learning who your kid is and
Yeah.
from their perspective. Rather than by some expectation or preconceived notions or unsaid things. I think
Yeah.
a lot of times there's a lot unsaid between parents and kids. There's a lot unsaid between youth leaders and students
Yeah.
and teachers and students probably too.
Yeah.
So I just hope this has been helpful for folks as we unpack and that picture of with
Mhm.
and to me that orientation towards God, orientation towards Jesus, how he sees people.
Yep.
I think that perspective is so crucial. I know I've heard Pastor Chris say it multiple times of you're never going to meet someone who Jesus didn't die for.
Yeah.
Whom Jesus didn't
Mhm.
die for. Yeah. So that perspective of how can we do that for everybody? How can we embrace hospitality rather than run from it?
How can we
Uh,
repair
yeah.
relationships that
Bring
are
in the
broken?
stranger, the
Yeah.
person that doesn't fit. How can I put them first? How can I follow those rules of hospitality we talked about earlier in the season of a person by themselves is an emergency. Friends can wait and introduce somebody new to someone else.
Mm.
Like and really it's changing my own perspective for how I will interact with people in on Sunday mornings, on at youth group events, things like that. Like, how can I help someone brand new feel like they're
Yeah.
home?
Yeah.
How can I do that? And that's a really key piece for especially our young people.
I agree.
All right. Well, next time, chapter 8, we will start dealing with the bigger question of purpose. So that's what we get to look into in the next episode. Please join the conversation with us, engage with us, ask us questions, whether that's in person when you see us, or whether or not you want to email us at raiseemup@trinitycline.org, or find us on Facebook at Raise 'em Up Podcast. Be sure to use that word podcast, or find us on the YouTube or wherever it is that you're listening to us. Share the conversation with someone else if this was beneficial to you or if it connected to something that you and a friend were talking about. Please feel free to share it with them. And until next time, enjoy the conversation, enjoy the curiosity of getting to know the kids, the young people in your life as you seek to help them answer these big questions. We'll see you next time.